Good morning, and it's great to be here. I've been Director of Hart Hill Consulting for a number of years. I've had the distinct privilege and pleasure of working with leaders, senior leaders in organisations for more than 2 decades. And it's been a great journey for me, and it's been thoroughly interesting to watch different senior folks at work. And what I want to talk to you about is some of the differences that I have seen in those senior leaders. And here's the good news, that as you grow older, you have experiences, and there's every opportunity for you to become wiser. Here's the bad news, that wisdom isn't inevitable. So you're on a kind of trajectory in your leadership. I see people of different ages here. You're all at different stages in that journey. But whether you become wiser leaders or not is optional. It's to do with you and your orientation towards leadership. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit this morning. So one of the critical things that we do as human beings all the time is to try to make sense of what happens. You're doing it now to me. You're already going through a process of sense making. The minute you wake up and reach for that first cup of coffee, you start making sense of things around you. I've got a gorgeous sheepdog. She's called Tid because she came from Merthyr Tydfil. And I love her to bits. She's got these beautiful brown eyes, and she's very obedient. But what she doesn't do is make sense of things. So, you know, I sometimes put her in the car to take her for a walk, and she's delighted by that, but sometimes I put her in the car to take her to the kennels. She doesn't know. And actually, 5 minutes out of the kennels, I'm sure she's forgotten she was ever there. She's not involved in that process of meaning-making, but we human beings are. We're constructing our reality all of the time. And the interesting thing about this is we're all doing it rather differently. We're building our reality. We're making sense of what goes on around us according to what's going on in our own minds. This sense-making process has a number of different stages, and they're not sequential in the way they're represented on the slides up here. We can dip into this in any order, but I'll start off with attention. So the first stage in sense-making is to be noticing, to giving attention to things. If you've ever walked in the countryside with a keen ornithologist, you'll notice that they have an exquisite degree of attention to things that in your world don't even exist. There are noises in the undergrowth, there are flight patterns, and there are sounds off left, and there may be all sorts of identifications going on. Somebody who's less keen on bird watching won't be attending to, won't be noticing what's in the environment with the same degree of precision. We operate like that in a broader way. We're attending to things, we're being selective about what we attend to. It's a continual and it's inevitable. So the first part of making sense of things is noticing them. And we notice some things and we don't notice other things. It's inevitable. The next step is interpretation. So what sense do we make of the things we have noticed? And of course, the engine of sense-making is interpretation. Somebody bursts into the room and shouts, we will all immediately, having noticed it, we will all immediately try to make sense of what happens. And as leaders, you are doing that continually. You are making sense of the things that go on around you, the fast and furious flow of interactions and events and comments. You're making your interpretation of that continually. And you're doing that on the basis of your previous experience. Now, one of the advantages we have as human beings is we lay down patterns of behavior. So we lay down habits of mind, habits of performance. They're both helpful, but they're also the way we get trapped. So sometimes we do things out of habit without moving into that zone of interpretation, without asking, why is this? Why am I thinking about it in this way? What's underneath this? We're just habitual creatures. And of course, what we notice and the sense we make of it leads to our action. So our action is never separate from our sense of how things are created, what's going on, what's in the background. So somebody bursts through the door, shouts something, I'll either duck or run or greet them according to the sense I'm making, the interpretation I've given to that. And you're doing that. That's your daily reality as leaders. Now, of course, I've built this just now as if it was a conscious process, but 99.5% of the time it's an unconscious process. So you're moving into action without really attending to what you've been seeing, your interpretation to it, and then what follows. So all of this has significance because what we give attention to and the sense we make of it comes to impact the way we lead. And what I've been working with for the last 2 decades is the kind of attention that leaders bring to the running of their organizations. Incidentally, that attention is no different to what the leaders bring to the running of their lives, but from a consultancy perspective, I'm interested in what they bring to the running of their organizations. What we've been discovering, and we're not alone in this, and Emily was talking about this earlier with the boldness and humility, what we've been discovering is only 5% of leaders can hold that paradoxical tension between boldness and humility, that there is some capability that enables leaders to see a complex system and work into it, which eludes the other 95% of leaders, that there's a capability which helps with this process of being able to handle exactly the kind of paradox that Emily was pointing to earlier. So, in this room, if we have the same statistic, 5% of us will have this transformational capability. Well, what is it? There are a number of different ways of looking at this and a number of different kind of strands of research. I've been working with a framework called the Leadership Development Framework, and it echoes and builds on Piaget's ideas about child development. Piaget said that children move through some anticipatable stages of increasing complexity in their engagement with the world. And this says absolutely right, and that continues. So there's some developmental stages. I don't know whether you can read them from the back. Impulsive, opportunist. Now, impulsive and opportunist are perfectly healthy childhood stages. They're dysfunctional adult stages. So if you ever had an opportunist leader, and 1 or 2 of us in the room will have had opportunist leaders, you'll know that's not a great place to be. Our prison population has a much higher percentage of opportunists in it than the population at large. The really good news is, I would bet quite a lot of money, nobody would profile an opportunist in this room. Okay, so that's, relax. Next stage is diplomat. So now it's a perfectly functional adult stage, and it's about fitting in, conforming, being a part of the general ethos. Very good for all sorts of operations in life, not so great for leading because of the conflicts that arise and therefore the difficulty of fitting in. So I'm not really interested in these earlier stages. The next stage, we'll describe them as action logics. The internal sense-making that leads to action is described as expert. In a survey we've done of leaders, the profiling of leaders, over 4,000 leaders, about 13% profile at expert. And the wonderful thing about experts is they bring a high degree of focus to what they consider to be their craft. So whether that be a psychologist, an educationalist, an engineer, a policeman, they bring a high degree of focus to that. So none of the things in this room would work. The camera at the back there, this computer, this clicker, the fact that the lights all work, all of that stuff would function if we didn't have that wonderful expert attention. So your colleges, your organizations will run well because you have people in key functions who work from this expert leadership perspective. The next important action logic is achiever. Now, it's really interesting to me. We've been profiling people in large organizations for many, many years, and approximately 55% of leaders, most of us, profile at achiever. Why? Because achiever's about go get it, go deliver it. So it's a focus on results and deliveries. And as you all know, without that, you run a dysfunctional organization. So this is a tremendously important action logic. The next action logic we describe as individualist. And the individualist pauses to ask why. So while the achiever has a massive amount of energy for getting out and delivering, the individualist says, hang on a minute, why this way? Why that structure? Why these people? What else might it be? So there's a questioning that arises from the individualist. Very, very useful, although sometimes the individualist members of your teams might feel as though they're not on board. Are you on the bus or are you off the bus? Is often a question that large organizations ask. And individualists often feel, because they'll take a contrarian view, that they're not on the bus. So an advantage there, but a disadvantage. 5% of strategists in this 4,000 people survey, 5% of strategists. So what do we strategists bring? Well, sorry, I don't want that slide yet. What do we strategists bring? We bring an ability to see things afresh. We bring an ability to handle the type of paradox that requires boldness and humility, that is able to operate into the system with a political acuity, but also a sensitivity to individuals, that has at its focus continually an interest in the vision, but also an ability, as Emily was talking about, to dive into the details where the details are relevant. An ability to move between one's own sense of oneself as an actor in the wide scene and a facilitator of others. An ability to see things in relationship to time, so that the past is held as an important part of what's happened, the future's vivid, and the current situation is brought into a consideration of that. So there's a kind of fluidity of movement. I remember working for an executive, and we'd run a pretty important away day for a huge number of staff, and it didn't work well. And I was kind of despondent and saying, it's a disaster. And he basically said, it's just, it's one small scene in the overall play, relax. And it was this ability to kind of hold perspective and not lose one's head. So are transformational leaders, are these strategists, are those amongst us born or are we made? Well, I'm not sure about quite how it fits. It's definitely clear that those of us who make meaning at these later action logics do have a high measured IQ. However, a high measured IQ doesn't mean that we'll move to these later action logics. It's to do with how we interact with the environment and how seriously we take the possibility that we may develop. So there's a really important transition occurs between the achiever and the strategist, when the achiever not only focuses on delivering results, but focuses on themselves as a developing human being. And that's a really significant difference, because for achievers, the obsession is results. And that's, of course, why great results are delivered. But that ability to pause oneself and do what Jim Collins called sharpening the saw, which is taking our development seriously, taking ourselves seriously enough to do some everyday humble practices, such as pausing to write about our experiences, as Emily was saying, pausing to talk to our partners about what happened in the day and making sense of it, taking time to read books that aren't in the mainstream of what we normally read, exposing ourselves to different ideas and different workshops. If you don't ever do anything like Tai Chi, go and do Tai Chi. If you don't do anything as dramatic and violent as kickboxing, go to a kickboxing lesson. If you've never been to a singing lesson, go to a singing lesson. These kind of things are what it means to take ourselves seriously. I'm not for a moment saying be serious. I'm saying take your development seriously. So there are 6 key strategist capabilities that I would point towards nurturing. So whether you're going to profile at expert, achiever, individualist, these capabilities we have found in organizations can be incredibly useful. So first of all, take an inquiring approach. So be willing to not know what's going on here, what's going on in me, what's going on in the system, what's going on for other people. So be prepared to inquire and be prepared to experiment. So do some things that you normally do differently. They can be little things. Run a meeting differently. Have a meeting standing up, don't sit down. Give the authority in a meeting to somebody else. These little ongoing experiments to see what's different. You know the saying, if you always do the same things, da-da-da-da-da. So next, dancing between the big picture and small details. I worked with an inspiring leader who moved into an organization as CEO. Organization was in a mess, and she was working absolutely at the level of vision. But she also paid attention to what was being served in the cafeteria and to the environment of the cafeteria. She personally took an interest in changing that. She moved between the vision and the detail, exactly because the detail becomes the vision. And it's that sliding between them that's important. The challenge for each of you is, where do you tend to get stuck? Do the details seduce you? Or does the vision seduce you? Where do you get stuck? And can you slide, can you move with agility between them? The courageous use of power is so significant to this later stage capability. The ability, first of all, to tell truth to authority. And we mustn't underestimate the challenge of telling truth to the authority. It requires courage every single time we do it. And the courage to really allow other people to have power. It's not about delegation, it's about giving genuine power to others for them to be able to move into the space. So 2 areas of courage in your leadership. Positive use of language. It's really clear, if you bring positiveness to your leadership, if you bring an appreciation of what's working, as well as a critical eye to what's not working, you will start to transform your organization. And if you further inquire rather than command, you will also bring inspiration to your organization. Act into the system. Be prepared to be systems leaders with all the subtlety and political awareness of that. And finally, and it comes to your wonderful question earlier, be passionate, but also propagate the ability to be detached, to let go. Because as we're passionate, we lean into something, and the danger is we lose our balance. So develop practices which enable you to step back from the very things that you're passionate about. Thank you. Thank you.
Just stay with us for a couple of minutes, David. So does anyone have any questions? The gentleman there.
Great talk. Thank you very much indeed. To be a great
Please wait for the mic.
Wait.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm James Brown. I'm Chair of Partners on Twitch.
Stand up, James, and then we'll hear you.
Hello.
Thank you very much. Great talk. I'm Chair of Governors of Central Bedfordshire Further Education College. To be a good scientist, you don't necessarily have to be very brilliant, but you do have to collaborate. And I just wondered what your view about collaborative leadership was within the context which you so well put there.
That heroic leadership is a seduction, and that at the later stages of awareness I'm talking about, one becomes aware of that and starts to look to the distribution of power and therefore collaboration with others. So I think it's really essential. But I do some leadership coaching, and I don't think I've worked with any leader who doesn't face as an ongoing challenge when to intervene powerfully from their own authority and insight, and when to share the problem. Because I think good leadership is both, but without collaboration, we're sunk.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. At the front.
Hi, I'm Nafisa Graham-Brown, Head of Skills for Life at ELAT. I was just interested in the slide you had of the marble and different types of leaders. And I was wondering if a strategist leader could also have a combination of other elements, or do you think that in itself is a separate kind of leadership?
Yeah, excellent, brilliant question. No, it's a cumulative, that we start off, and in our childhood we have impulsive and opportunist, and then diplomat and so on. And as we move through developmental stages, we take the stages with us. So a strategist can choose under duress to be a diplomat, but a diplomat can't choose to be a strategist, although they may have moments of brilliance. And actually those moments of brilliance are the things that help us develop. Great question.
The gentleman in the white jacket again.
Stand up, please. I was just thinking
Stand
by 2030, I don't think I'll be worrying too much. No, I was just wondering, thank you again very much for a very interesting contribution. Vision, what part does that play in the development of leadership?
Do you know, I think it's easy to inflate vision at an organisational level. And of course it's important, but I think the work on vision starts at a personal level, because that question, it was a slide I didn't show, but one of the areas we should inquire into is, who am I and what do I stand for? What's important to me? And I think that's tremendously important. So the shift between this achiever action logic and the later action logic often comes through, it's a question of vision, and it's often a doubt. So it's, I've been working this hard, I've been doing it for years, is there anything else? And that's, I believe, a question of vision. So I think we need to attend to that, because from there we can more freely develop the organisational vision. But of course, it's important to collaboratively develop the organisation vision.
That's it. Thank you very much, Dave. That's an excellent talk. Thank you.
Thank you.